So the essence of something is simply what it is. Its inner reality, or as we've learned to say, its essential reality. Do any of you here do the New York Times crossword puzzle? You don't? The Chicago Tribune crossword puzzle? You don't? One person back there. One person back there. If you want an easy one, do the local daily journal. You can do that in 5 minutes. The New York Times crossword puzzle is the toughie. The Sunday Times is the worst that exists. Terrible. If ever you feel not challenged, try it. But typical in the New York Times, if you do it enough, you get to recognize clues that keep recurring, is a clue which says something like, what is? Or is for Plato. And you know immediately that what they're after is the verb esse, which means simply to be. You see, essence is what it is, what it be, just that. So don't be thrown with the term essence, okay? Render it more literally as you read if you prefer. But this is the way he goes. One commentator on Aristotle says this: he tortures the Greek language. He coins new words and twists old ones to suit his purposes. He puts a preposition and an indefinite pronoun together and treats the combination as a noun that we translate relation. He turns a question into a technical term and asks, what is it of this? What is it, essence of this? He says that for a thing to be what it is to be a being. And under the pressure of history, we still translate that final variation, being, in the perplexing term, substance. What is a substance? A being. What is an essence? What the being is. You see? And so the word substance simply refers to anything that has being. You see? Anything that has being. Well, don't let the terminology throw you. Now, if we're going to get at the differences between Plato and Aristotle, undoubtedly the best place to begin is with Aristotle's Metaphysics, and to focus in as soon as we can on the forms, because it is there that Aristotle's most far-reaching disagreements with Plato surface. If, as I just suggested in terms of this diagram of the hub of the wheel and the spokes, if in Plato the divided line, representing the form's particulars relationship, is central to everything else, then any disagreement there is going to have consequences out on the periphery of the scheme. So we have to zero in on Aristotle's Metaphysics to begin with. Now, in the Kaufmann Anthology, we have book 1 of the Metaphysics in completeness, in addition to some other materials from the Metaphysics. And book 1, chapters 1 and 2, that is from 297 to 300, are really concerned with defining the scope, the subject matter of metaphysics. And I think you can best get what Aristotle has in mind if you take a look at that simple scheme. He starts by distinguishing 2 varieties of knowledge, practical and theoretical. The end, the goal, the purpose of practical knowledge is, of course, action. Practical knowledge can be productive. It has, therefore, as we say, instrumental value. It's a means to some other end than itself. Whereas theoretical knowledge, the end of which, the purpose of which, is understanding the truth, knowing the truth, theoretical knowledge is a value in itself. It has intrinsic value. Intrinsic value. Theoretical knowledge is called speculative. And don't let those words confuse you. The verb theoro is a Greek verb, meaning to see, to look at, to regard, to examine visually. And speculo is the Latin equivalent. That's where we get our word specules. So speculative knowledge is simply a knowledge that wants to think, to look about something, to contemplate it. And so both theoretical and speculative speak of a knowledge that is value for itself. We want to understand it. We want to think about it. We want to know it. Intrinsic value rather than instrumental. Okay? Now, you notice that of practical knowledge, there are 2 kinds distinguished. One labeled experience, and the other labeled art. We might do better to call it artifact, because the emphasis is on knowing how to make something. If art implies some sort of high art, then this would be arts and crafts. But things which are artifacts, the business of making artifacts, the knowledge of making artifacts, the how to do it. Experience, however, the earlier variety, experience would include memory and thence the accumulation of experiences. Experience is simply a kind of knowing what is around, knowing what's happening, knowing what happened to you yesterday. That's a kind of knowledge that is useful, but you don't do much with it. On the other hand, the knowledge that's involved in arts and crafts, well, think of all of the trades, all of the productive professions that are involved, in which you can, by understanding, by knowing what are the efficient ways of getting things done, you can cause all things to happen, all sorts of things to happen. With that knowledge, you can really do things. You can make things. You can change things. It's the practical knowledge of the craftsman. But metaphysics is not a kind of practical knowledge. It's a kind of theoretical knowledge that has intrinsic value. It is a science. And our word science, from the Latin scientia, we usually confine to talking about particular sciences, natural sciences, social sciences. In Europe, the word science, or the equivalent of Wissenschaft, refers to any theoretical study. So the study of ethical theory is a science. Theology is a science. Any theoretical study is a science. And the Greeks are using it in that sense, theoretical study. But you can distinguish between particular sciences and what he calls first wisdom, which is the science of sciences, the science of doing science. The overarching science of all the sciences, the most general of all the sciences. Now, particular sciences are concerned with the various principles that are at work in a particular area of things, in different kinds of things. And it's Aristotle who introduces classification in terms of species and families and so forth. Very much so. But in those areas, what the scientist is after is an understanding of the first principles, that is to say, of what causes things to function as they function. And if you can understand those first principles, then you can understand that whole classification of things, work it out accordingly. We'll come back to that in a little while. First wisdom, however, he speaks of as the science of sciences, or the science of being. You see, there are different kinds of things. There are sciences having to do with animals. There are sciences having to do with plants. There are sciences having to do with the heavenly bodies and their movements. Sciences having to do with all sorts of things. But all of the things that sciences are about are beings. Who studies being, what it is to be, and to become. Now that is the science of sciences, the science of being. The first wisdom that we call metaphysics. Now there I must add a footnote. Aristotle does not use the word metaphysics. You say, oh, but the title of this work of his is Metaphysics. Yeah, his students after his death gave it that title. Why? Well, apparently they were organizing notes that he had left and they had, notes that he had used in teaching, so forth. And they were organizing these compendious notes in various classifications of things. And they had some about the heavens that they called dekylo, some about being born and dying that they called on generation and corruption. They had some things about nature that they called ta physica, physics. And then they had a whole lot of stuff they didn't know what to do with it. So they lumped it all together, put it in the organization after the physics and called it ta physica, what comes after physics. And that's how we got our word metaphysics. So the word metaphysics is an accident. But the nature of metaphysics from the beginning, you see, since it was the label for all this material, the nature of metaphysics is that it's the science of being, the first causes of all causes. Okay? And in that sense, it's very much concerned about forms and processes of becoming for every kind of being. Okay? Well, that's the sort of definition that's involved. You'll find that in talking of being, he sometimes uses the phrase, or the translation does, since it's Latin, being qua being, which means simply being in the sense simply of being, rather than being in the sense of being an animal, or being in the sense of being a chair, or being in the sense of being a warm day. You see? No, being qua being, being in the sense of being. So metaphysics then has those overall concerns. And that definition of metaphysics really stuck for centuries. It was refined a little bit in the 18th century by a German philosopher who suggested that we do better to think of metaphysics this way. First of all, dealing with being in general, being qua being, ontology, the study of being. Okay. But then there are three basic kinds of being, and so the study of them, philosophically, would have to be called philosophical cosmology, the study of nature, philosophical psychology, the study of the human mind, soul, philosophical psychology, and philosophical theology, the study of God. And that apart from particular sciences. That is to say, apart from biblical or dogmatic or systematic theology as a particular science. Apart from what we now think of as, say, experimental psychology as a particular science. Or apart from physics or astronomy as particular sciences. That is to say, the philosophical concerns in these areas. But that's a classification which emerges in the 18th century, and it simply is saying that it's pretty hard, if you're looking at being qua being, to keep your nose out of other things more particularly. And we'll see that's the case with Aristotle, because he can't help when he's talking of being qua being and ultimate causes in having to talk in terms of ultimate causes, of course, about God. You see. Though he doesn't purport to be talking about the theology of any particular religion at all. So, definitions. That's the first thing. Any question there? That's pretty straightforward, and I simply schematise it this way to help you read those first two chapters, first few pages. Okay. Well, let's turn our attention then to the second topic, having to do with the forms and with causes. When we were dealing with Plato's theory of forms, and particularly with the Parmenides, we became very much aware of problems which Plato's version of the theory of forms, with its transcendent forms, and this world of physical particulars here below, runs into. And perhaps the most overall problem is the problem of participation. However, do particulars participate in universals? What does it mean to participate? You participate in the Father and the whole. The third man argument, you remember? And all that sort of stuff. Well, Aristotle's aware of a great deal of that, and you'll find in the remainder of Book 1 of the Metaphysics that he pulls out that sort of stuff and a lot more besides in criticizing Plato. I leave you to trace that line of thought out, but let me mention some points that he makes, not just there, but elsewhere in his writings. Take, for instance, this. According to Plato, form is separate from matter. Forms are transcendent. Material things don't embody forms, but they somehow or other are like forms. But there aren't any forms in material objects. Well, Aristotle finds that incredible. You see, among the forms are mathematical objects. Yes, the form of equality, the form of a triangle, the form of a triad, a threesome, so on and so forth. And mathematical objects cannot be separate from material objects because material objects have mathematical properties, don't you know? So if mathematical objects, as a sample of forms, cannot be separated from material objects, physical objects, then forms cannot be separate from matter. Plato should have known that. He was so influenced by Pythagoras, and he knew that physical things had mathematical order to them. Or try this, that's an argument that comes out in Book 2, Chapter 2 of the Physics. Try this other one, which comes out in some of his ethical writings. Plato's form of the good is only an ideal to be contemplated. It has no effective power itself. Form of the good is an ideal without effective power. But, on the other hand, particulars have no form in them, only matter. What then inclines the particular towards orderedness, beauty? It's good. What is there in matter, material things, to give them their natural impetus, direction towards the good? If forms are transcendent and not immanent in matter. How can you explain natural changes in the physical universe? Changes that produce naturally order, beauty, goodness, when there's no form in the material thing, and the transcendent forms have no effective power. How do you explain it? Well, you know, having thought about Plato, you probably say, well, what's the world soul for anyway? Isn't the world soul the effective power? But Aristotle isn't happy with that. He's open to the conception of the good as God, but the idea of a world power animating sounds too, well, I suppose if he were here today, he'd say unscientific. It sounds too much like a story. Surely there's a much easier explanation than that, you see. If material objects have mathematical properties, then there must be the form of mathematical objects in the material objects. You see? And if plants and animals and natural processes spontaneously produce order and beauty, there must be the potency of form within the material things and processes. So where's he getting? What's he getting at? Why do we need to talk about transcendent forms? Why not immanent forms? Forms are not transcendent in some far-off Platonic heaven. You see? Forms don't exist by themselves, wandering around looking for a home on this earth. Forms are the forms of things. They're immanent within the things that they inform. So you take any particular cat, a cabbage, a king, a cauliflower, you name it. Any particular is a composite. A particular is a composite of form and matter. Not just matter somehow or other without any power struggling to copy some ideal. No, but the particular itself is a composite of form and matter. And consequently, Aristotle's view of particulars gets to be known as hylomorphism. Hylomorphism, the Greek word hule, being one of the words for matter, material stuff, and of course morphe being form, as in morphology. So